Brilliant. So welcome everyone to this session. My name is Francine Ryan. I'm a senior lecturer in the law school and I'm also director of the Open Justice Centre. And I'm delighted tonight to be joined by Lee Robbins and Lorrie Hayman. And this session is around kind of PhD further study, because we thought it was a really good opportunity to bring together a kind of a conversation around what you might do post an undergraduate course, because sometimes students have heard of a PhD, but they're not sure whether it's for them or not. And so Lorrie and Lee have different backgrounds, but doing a PhD for different reasons. But I think they've got something really interesting to share that might resonate with your own experiences and might resonate with what you might like to do in the future. So we're going to try and keep this like a bit of a conversation, and I've got some questions that I'm going to ask Lee and Lorrie. But as JP said, please feel free to put some questions in the Q&A as you go along if you've got a question, and we might be able to kind of ask it as we go, or at the end we will give you opportunity to ask questions. So I'm sure this is going to be a really interesting chat. So Lorrie, can I start with you, and can you tell us a little bit about your background and what motivated you to return to study for a PhD?
Yep, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lorrie Hayman. I'm a doctoral researcher based at the University of Gallway, and I'm also working with Francine as a research associate in the Open Justice Centre. So my background's quite eclectic. I did an undergrad degree in history combined honours with dance, so pretty unusual. I don't have a law background. And I then went on and did teacher training, where I then worked as a teacher in the UK for 5 years in history and politics. After doing that for a little while, I then decided to move to Japan, where I lived for 6 years and worked as a teacher. And during that experience of living in Japan, I discovered the Rotary Peace Fellowship. And the Rotary Peace Fellowship enabled me to explore issues around peace, conflict, and violence, and undertake an MA degree, undertake a master's degree. And during that, I then my master's degree looked at digital literacy, actually, but I discovered digital violence while I was doing this research. And particularly, I came across a story of a young woman based in South Korea who had been victimized in a spy cam form of digital violence. She'd been secretly recorded without her consent. And what really stood out to me was that there was almost no recourse for her. She had a lack of support. People didn't really even understand what had happened to her, and it wasn't illegal. And this really stayed with me, and it bugged me. And so then I decided that was why I wanted to do a PhD. I had this topic and this question of like, what is this, and why don't people pay attention to it in the way that they should do? And I decided to examine that. And that's kind of how I ended up getting to doing a PhD, but it was a bit of an eclectic journey, starting with a history and dance degree quite a while ago, mind you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So Lee, same question. Any dance in your background, or is yours slightly more traditional?
Slightly more traditional. I'm not sure it can compete with Lorrie's story there, but I'll give it a go. So hi everyone, I'm Lee Robbins. I'm a PhD researcher at the Open University. I am coming to the end of my second year, and I study it part-time. So going back many years, I remember when I was at school and went to sort of the careers advisor and said, "Oh, I want to be a lawyer," and they said, "Don't be so silly. You're not smart enough for that." And that was the end of that story. So anyway, I went through school, did pretty well, and ended up just working in retail for quite a number of years. Got to a senior management position. And then kind of that ended, and I ended up taking them to an employment tribunal, and I went up against the lawyer, and I held my own. I think I can do this. So with the money that I settled with, I did my law degree with the OU part-time, where I first met Francine. And then after I got a first-class law degree, I went on and did my master's at the University of Law in Guildford. Again, part-time. I did that alongside doing the legal practice course. Passed both of those with distinction. I currently work full time as a director in a corporate finance firm, helping small businesses and owner managers businesses raise capital or sell. So selling their business when they want to. And during that time and working with Francine at Open Justice, it kind of opened my eyes to the plight of small businesses and their ability to get access to quality legal advice, and certainly lack of it that they get hold of. So my PhD topic is looking at access to justice. It's looking at small businesses, and it's also looking at how AI-driven legal technology could help bridge that gap. So that's kind of my story, a little more traditional.
Yeah, but interesting advice, and I'm sure lots of other people have had really poor advice from careers people back in the day, sort of curbing their ambition and their desire. And clearly, you have demonstrated how wrong that advice was. So I don't know if your careers teacher's still with us, but I hope you at some point let your school know how well that you have done.
I don't even remember their name, to be honest now. So, but the whole incident has stuck with me all through these years,
Yeah.
And certainly since I started the law degree has been kind of a driving force. And then you kind of realize, well, actually, I can do this. I'm holding my own. I can do this. And then it kind of went on, okay, well, if I don't do the masters, I'm never going to do it. And so I did that, and then the PhD came about, and I remember an evening phone call with you, Francine, saying, "Is this a stupid idea?" And you were like, "No, let me put you in contact," and the rest is history. So it's all Francine's fault that I'm here.
Yeah, indeed. You blame me, which is great because I know that you're going to do a brilliant PhD. But what were you? Because obviously your kind of motivation in terms of like where you are currently in your job. What were you hoping that a PhD would give you? And we'll stick
Um,
with you, Lee, for that, because
yeah.
obviously.
So personally, I think it's just extending that educational journey. I didn't go into professional practice for a few reasons, but I still wanted to keep in touch with the law because I enjoy it as a topic. And the fact that I work with small businesses and see the gap that they have kind of motivates me to help these people, because there is a huge swathe of owner managed businesses, small businesses, whether they're sole operators or they've got 5 staff or something like that, that are just not getting any legal advice when they're entering into contracts or when they have an employment dispute, or even something as simple as getting a new insurance policy and not knowing what those terms mean. But and I just hope that it could kind of highlight the plights that these businesses kind of just ignored.
Okay, interesting. And in terms of you, Lorrie, so obviously you've had you've changed careers. What you kind of careers are kind of, I suppose, kind of developed and then kind of pivoted slightly, but they've all kind of around a similar theme, aren't they? What are you hoping? What were you hoping for in terms of this PhD, and maybe thinking more broadly about your kind of career options?
Similar to Lee, when I was at school, I don't even think there was careers advice actually when I was there. I grew up in quite a deprived area and there just weren't these kinds of opportunities. So further study really sort of stopped for me at undergraduate degree. I couldn't have possibly imagined that there would be a future learning pathway for me until several years in Japan and discovering the Rotary Peace Fellowship kind of in my late 20s. The reason I really wanted to do a PhD, it was topic driven primarily. So I recognized that in doing a PhD, I had the opportunity to expand awareness both in law and policy and in practice as well of an issue that's considerably neglected, although less so since I started my PhD in 2022, fortunately. It's an issue that is growing in awareness, digital violence, but yeah, particularly when I started, there was just a lack of evidence. There was a lack of understanding about how it impacted different groups, different people. And so I was driven by wanting to make that difference, to provide that knowledge, that understanding that then could be used in law, policy and practice. And I'm based in Ireland doing my PhD, and there really just hasn't been any focus of on this here. And so it was driven by that kind of desire for change, which initially I was concerned was a bit idealistic, because everyone wants to change the world with their research, right? Like that's a very sort of common common thread. But actually, even in making small changes, in growing awareness and being able to provide evidence to politicians that didn't exist previously, it is already research that's making that difference. And so, yeah, that kind of desire for change, if you work hard and you connect with the right people and you then share your findings, it can actually happen through a PhD. And yeah, I'm discovering that.
And I think that's this real synergy between you and Lee, and what you both discussed, that both of you are looking at something that's kind of a complex kind of topic, but also you've got that practical aspect to it, where you're trying to think about what can this research do. It's not just research for research's sake. It's how can we use this research to actually make a difference, which I think perhaps sometimes people don't always realize with a PhD. They think it's sometimes more about a kind of theoretical topic, but actually it can be broader than that, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my major fears going into a PhD. I just didn't really think I was smart enough. I didn't really understand theory. I had a very theoretical professor during my MA degree, and I used to sit in the classes and think, I have absolutely no idea what he's talking about. And you know, that was quite scary, the thought of that brain going into a PhD. And then I realized that, yeah, that not all PhDs have to engage with theoretical application in that way. And I've been able to do it in my own way. You know, I do have to use theory in my research, but it's in a really practice-based way, in a way that I understand.
Yeah,
more importantly. Yeah,
absolutely. And did you have any other doubts before, apart from that? I think you've sort of kind of indicated a particular thing you were concerned about, but did you have any other kind of concerns going into this about it? Not just about can I do this, which I think is a very normal thing that everyone who does a PhD definitely feels.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, it was a very practical doubt, which was, how am I going to pay for it? It was really practical. Like how am I going to do this in Ireland? It's a 4-year project. I was working. I didn't want to leave my work, but I also needed this to be a funded endeavour if I was going to do it at all. So that was my main doubt and my main concern, which took a couple of years to work through. I ultimately received funding, but there was a kind of process that I had to sort of reconcile with, of whether I would be willing to do it without the funding or not. And ultimately I decided not. It needed to be funded. And so that then delayed me by 2 to 3 years while I was seeking that funding. So yeah, that was quite a considerable doubt that, again, I think is probably applicable to a lot of people. It's an expensive thing to do. Absolutely. And it takes a lot of time.
So do you see this as kind of like your PhD has been like a job, effectively?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I treat it as such. So I work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. That's been a very important process of kind of self-care through the PhD, because ultimately I'm left alone. I can do it when I want, or not. And so that sort of structure and treating it like a job, has been essential, because it is a job. I am doing a job. It's just not always called that or reflected in that way by universities.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for students to understand that it can be a job. So it's not just doing a PhD, but that if it's funded, then it can be that kind of, it can be the equivalent of your job.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Turning to you, Lee, did you have any doubts? And also be interested to just, and you're doing yours part-time, how you see that in relation to your actual day job that obviously then pays for your life, etc.
Yeah, so I think I had 3 kind of key doubts. 2 of them have already been mentioned. The first one being, am I smart enough to do this? You know, it's it's still them, and then probably Lorrie agrees that you have this kind of imposter syndrome all the way through. It's like, why am I doing this? Why do they think I can do this? I can't do this, kind of thing all the way through. But actually, you can. The other doubt, like Lorrie, was funding, even part time. Luckily, my work have picked up the bill. And so they're paying for me to do this as well as work for them. So that was really kind of them. And to go to Francine's final point, probably the biggest one was how am I going to fit this into my life? So not only working 40 plus hours a week on a 9 to 5 job, but also to study 20 hours a week as well, and fit that in a way that would be sustainable, and still give me enough time to spend with family and friends and do other stuff. And you kind of just have to be really strict. And luckily I had a bit of previous, having done my OU law degree part-time while working full-time. I already had a blueprint for a schedule that I knew worked for me. And once I got that, it all seems to slot into place. Some weeks it goes out the window because work takes over, and some weeks the PhD takes over. And as long as you can balance that, then that works. But those were the 3 key doubts that I had going into it. And at least one of them's still there.
Yeah, and I think so I finished my PhD 2 years ago, and I think that the imposter syndrome doesn't. Weirdly, I think the more you do, the more imposter syndrome you get. You don't actually get less sometimes, which is quite strange.
I do agree with that.
But also, which I don't really know why, because you think you've become more confident, but bizarrely, sometimes you don't. Yeah, maybe that.
Yeah, I think there's an expectation, like as you conclude your PhD, which I'm about to do, and then you transition into a academic role. Yeah, you're the expert now. You are the global expert on your topic, and that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
What's also interesting is you actually suddenly realise how much you don't know.
Yes.
And I think that adds to the imposter syndrome as well, because you suddenly become very, very knowledgeable about one single topic, but know there's this entire world of people that have as in-depth knowledge about what you don't know. And that kind of quite scary as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also I worked full-time whilst doing my PhD, and I think what happens afterwards, and I think however you do your PhD, whether that's full-time or part-time, afterwards you kind of look back and you think, I don't even know how I managed to do it. But it's amazing how because I don't suddenly feel now that I've got loads more time. So I think it is incredible how we kind of are able to kind of to manage things in a way that perhaps we don't always anticipate. And I think with a PhD, to me, it's like it's one of those things where you commit and you have to just keep going. And if you can keep going, then you will get to the end. But you just have to have that kind of resilience to kind of keep going every day, even when it's hard, and just do, a little bit. And then it's amazing how suddenly, like Lorrie, Lee, you're into your second year, Lorrie, you're into your 4th year, and suddenly here you are about to submit, about to do your Viva. So it's incredible how time passes, I think, as well. Okie doke. Can you so Lorrie, I'm just asking you, can you talk a little bit about, you obviously had a really interesting background. You've got a history background, a politics background. You've taught in Japan. You've taught in sort of education. What did that professional experience give you in terms of doing a PhD? Did it give you a different perspective, or how did it kind of influence your kind of approach to a PhD?
Yeah, I think it really influenced my approach more than anything. Firstly, recognizing the need for funding. I know that's not something that's available to everybody, but it made me realize I needed to treat this as a job, and that was the only way I was going to get through it. I think, like, you guys are incredibly resilient. I just don't think I could have done this part-time for me, and partly that's because of the topic. So it's quite a heavy topic, digital violence. Like, it's not, it requires quite a lot of resilience to just do the topic in the first instance, and so it wouldn't really worked, I don't think, as a part-time PhD. I think work experience also gave me the perspective of treating it like a 9 to 5, treating it like a job, and that rest time is essential for success, and that self-care, still seeing friends, still having time with my family was really important. Whereas, I do see, and it works for different people, but I do see some of my PhD colleagues kind of really working like until midnight in the office, sending messages in the group WhatsApp of like, can anyone let me into the office at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning? And for me, that just the experience of working 9 to 5, that showed me that structure is quite important for a successful PhD from my perspective. Work experience also made me expand my locations of where I was willing to do the PhD, which again isn't available to everyone. And from Lee's perspective, obviously he had a job, so that this wouldn't have been something available to him. But I was not able to get funding in the UK, and so I looked elsewhere. And Ireland, I was able to get funding, and so I moved to Ireland, and it's been a wonderful experience, and I love living here. But that kind of work experience in the UK and then in Japan gave me that sort of incentive, I suppose, to look elsewhere and use my sort of love of traveling and living in different places, even though there's no doubt it's an upheaval before you then start a PhD journey, but one that has been really important. And I think the kind of other thing that I got from work experience was project management experience, like as a teacher, and then as a PhD researcher. Project management is really important, and ultimately a PhD is a big, long, multi-year project, and so treating it as such, kind of make sure you have your goals for each year, you know what your targets are, the things you want to achieve, flexibility in the time frame where possible, but it's not always that possible. Has all been really important, and all of that came from my prior background and has been instrumental in a successful PhD within the completion time frame that it needed to be as well.
Fantastic. And building on that, Lee, just talk us a little bit about like what does actually a PhD involve? Like what do you sort of, like now, how is it different to what you anticipated, but how's your experience so far, kind of year one going into year two, in terms of what actually is involved in the process?
Yeah, so there's an awful lot of things that you have to juggle. There is training courses that you need to go to because like Lorrie was quite unprepared in terms of philosophical grounding, theoretical knowledge, and all things like that. So there's a lot to take in from that point of view. The biggest thing that you have to do in the first 2 years that I've been doing it is just reading and reading and reading and getting to know your subject and your subject matter experts like the back of your hand, so that you just remember things, what they do. And then once you've been doing the reading, it's then time to put all that into your own words. How do you take what you've read and put it into your own words that make some kind of coherent sense? And there is a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a lot of rewriting, a lot of rereading. And that's basically the first 2 years of what I've been doing in my PhD, alongside, as Lorrie alluded to, kind of managing the project to a way that you are making progress every single day, because even if it's only reading a chapter, even if it's only reading half a journal article, you've moved your project forward a little bit. And so just learning those skills of how to project manage, if you don't have them and you haven't come across them in your workplace, is essential. And then it's just managing your project, using different bits of technology, using different bits of skills that you've picked up in life are all invaluable. And so the key thing is, and and just to carry on what Francine was saying about the resilience and just the will to keep going, is you just have to keep reading, keep writing, and that's kind of what I've been doing.
Brilliant, thank you. And Lorrie, you talked a little bit about your experience doing your masters. How did doing a PhD compare to, say, previous master's study or study at undergraduate level?
So my masters in Japan, they're actually 2 years. So
Right.
if you compare that to a UK PhD that's 3 years, it's not too dissimilar. So I had to do independent research and write a thesis, and I had to defend that thesis. But the difference with the masters is it was in a more structured way. I was attending classes, I was attending seminar groups in a way that just hasn't been applicable to my PhD. So my PhD isn't part of a group, it isn't part of a lab, it's an independent project that I'm funded to do independently. So it has to be independent by kind of part of the design. And so it sort of means that weeks can go by actually without communication to or by my university.
Yeah.
And ultimately it's really up to me. Of course my supervisor wants me to succeed, but it's not really any loss to her if I don't. Whereas the masters was different. There was a lot more kind of accountability with me and other people. For a PhD, that's not the case. It's a very independent, self-driven project, and so it does really require that quite considerable self-discipline, I think. So in that way it was quite different. The beauty of that, I suppose, is that it's an independent project for not for everyone, but for some people who choose that route of PhD, which means you get to design and create a research project and focus on whatever you want to do, and that's a really rare opportunity as well, because it means you can have this motivation to explore a particular topic and then be able to do that for your job for 4 years, which is an incredible privilege. It really is.
Yeah, definitely. I think that freedom and creativity doesn't come very often in that world, that you actually get to choose something that you can spend all that time to want to explore. You just have to also make sure that you choose wisely, because
Yes,
you're spending a lot of time in this topic, and so you need to make sure that you're really happy with your choice, don't you?
yeah, you do.
Absolutely, thank you. And so, Lee, you've obviously did so you did your law degree, your undergraduate law degree, which was kind of obviously looking at particular legal topics, and then you did your legal practice course in your masters. And so I'm, because I've done a very much more similar route to you as well. I did legal practice course before I qualified, etc. So just talk a little bit about, could you talk a little bit about the difference between that kind of study compared to, say, a PhD, and how you found that difference?
Yeah, so with the masters, not like Lorrie, doing your masters is a taught course. So you're taught different bits and pieces. So from a legal point of view, you did a bit on business law, you did real estate, you did civil and criminal litigation, and you were examined on those. And then you did, your master's dissertation at the end, which was you chose which bit of the law you liked, and the topics were then you had a list of topics that you could choose. So with mine, I chose an M&A topic because I was sort of working in M&A, mergers and acquisitions. So I took the Comcast acquisition of Warner Brothers, and did a dissertation on that. I didn't have to defend it on a Viva. That was part of it, but COVID hit on the final year of my masters, and so it was they got rid of the Viva bit and actually just examined it on the written work. And the big difference from that was I found that the masters was very descriptive about what the topic was about. So you were very descriptive. You didn't delve deep and ask the question why. And in your PhD study, it's all about the why. And you, as Lorrie said, you get to choose your topic. You get to design your research on how you're going to answer the questions that you've designed. But it's all about going into the why. Why are things this way? And is there a way of making them better? Whereas master's level is all about this is the description of what happened.
Yep. Interesting. And could you just say a little bit about, so obviously you talked about that very taught, obviously in undergraduate course is a taught course, master's is taught. And then in your PhD, obviously you have much more freedom and flexibility. It's much more self-driven, but you work with either one or two supervisors, depending on the institution that you're in. Can you just talk a little bit, Lee, about how that is and what that looks like? Because I imagine for lots of students, that's something that they've never kind of come across in terms of that way of in which you kind of engage through your project.
Yeah, and it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge going from taught undergrad or taught master's courses into basically having to teach yourself. So you end up having to work out, what should I be reading? How should I be doing the note taking? What do I engage with that's worth my time, and what's a rabbit hole that I don't need to go down? And you will go down rabbit holes and disappear for a month or so and then come back up. And that's really important. That's that's something that you have to kind of think about. Your relationship with your supervisors. I've got 3 supervisors for on my PhD. All of them have done part-time PhD, the same as me, as what I'm doing, and you need them to kind of keep you on track. And it's not about asking them, oh, what do I need to study next? It's, I'm going to do this next. Is this the right thing for me to be doing? And it's a much more proactive, led by you conversation, rather than this is the book, we're going to turn to page, whatever it may be, and we're going to study this topic. You have to drive that conversation. I've read this journal article, don't quite understand this bit. Can you give me a bit more information about it, or point me in the direction I can find some more information about? Or I've read this article and this is what I understand to be the thing, and this is how it relates to my project, and this is what's driving what I'm saying. So you go from being a reactive learner to a proactive learner. And that happens really quickly. And it's within the first couple of months of you starting, you suddenly realize no one's going to tell me where to look for stuff. But I've got to start somewhere. And you suddenly go, you get a bit of direction and you ask kind of, what should I start with my reading? And then you start getting into that. So it's really important that you kind of switch from that reactive, doing as you're told, to proactive, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Lorrie, how did you find that kind of working with, I don't know if you've got one supervisor, two supervisors, how did you find that kind of relationship, and what do you kind of reflect in terms of over the last 4 years, how that's kind of progressed?
Yes, I have one supervisor, so kind of leaning quite heavily on one person, I suppose, in that respect. And I would say, similarly, that relationship has been led by me. And I actually, kind of reflecting on a story, when I first started my PhD, my first meeting with my supervisor, I sent her a little agenda through and was making notes during the meeting on this document. And she said to me afterwards that had never happened to her before. And that was going back to your previous question around work experience and project management and things, like how has my previous experience supported my PhD? That's been essential, and now it's something that she kind of requires of her PhDs, because everyone's knows what's going on. There's documentation, everyone's clear on what the goals are for the next couple of months and so on, and so that relationship is really sort of been, I guess, a mentor relationship. Initially, I thought she was going to be like my boss, but it's not like that at all. It's far closer to mentor friendship than it is that sort of boss hierarchy. And you can see that in the way that the conversations happen, but also, she is an academic who has influence in the way that I don't within an institution, and she's able to support me in gaining influence. She's able to do projects with me, write papers with me, support me to share my research findings beyond my kind of network through her network and things like that. So there's a lot more sort of mentoring that I get from it. And it's also, she sort of provides I guess a safety net, because I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done a PhD before. I don't know anybody who's done a PhD before, so I felt very unprepared. It's not the kind of background I come from. And so having somebody who has experienced a PhD and knows some of the complexities of academia to turn to and sense check ideas and share challenges and get feedback from her on has been really, really important.
Absolutely. And similar to you, I had one PhD supervisor through my PhD. And I do think it's really important, that relationship, and you have to learn how to manage that relationship as well, because every supervisor is very different depending on the institution that you're in. But I think both of you highlight that really important point that it's much more of a kind of, you're on as equals because you have conversations about the research, about the project. So it's not that kind of, hopefully not that hierarchical relationship in that way, but also you have to be able to manage your supervisor as well as the process. So it's another additional thing, isn't it, to be sort of thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. Whereas I think initially I thought maybe that she would be managing me.
Yes.
And it quickly became apparent, like, oh, it's not not
it's
that. I'm not at work in that way.
Yeah, certainly that's one thing that I got from kind of working, is that ability to manage upwards. And you can read lots of books about how to do it, but if it's something that you can do, it really does help with this project.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important thing for lots of Open University students, that lots of Open University students are working and have lots of experience of work, so can draw on those skills to help them through a PhD. So that a lot of students will already have, just like you did, Lee, Lorrie, both of you had all those skills already, and so it's about recognizing them and recognizing where they're going to sort of apply in the process. Lorrie, can I ask you, in terms of you may at some point want a career in academia, but how, if you weren't necessarily thinking about a career in academia, how transferable do you think the skills are that you've developed and doing a PhD is beyond just potentially an academic career?
I think they're really transferable, and actually doing a PhD made me realise that I've been a researcher since I was 18. When I did my undergrad, I then graduated, became a teacher. That was research. Believe it or not, I didn't know all of politics and history, so I was then given the curriculum, and I had to research the topics to be able to teach them. And so research skills, I think, are so important, because when you are a good researcher, you think critically and are able to analyze. And those, I think, are the core of almost all successful roles. If you can think critically, engage critically with something and analyze it in a way that isn't just repeating what you saw, but actually adding to, developing, seeing what else comes from it. I think, that's such an important thing for so many different roles. My husband in cybersecurity, he doesn't have a PhD, but we sit side by side at home doing the same thing all day. We're researching, thinking critically, and analyzing. And so it's sort of shown me that I could do what he does. I could go back to teaching. I could continue in academia. But yeah, the world really feels like it's available to me in terms of jobs for the future, because I've managed this incredibly complex and challenging 4-year project. I've honed my knowledge, yes, in a very specific area, but in an area that is beneficial to society. And I've been thinking critically and analysing for 4 years. So those are now skills that I have that are only going to continue to improve as I graduate as well.
Yeah, and I also think there's a hugely developing kind of industry around policy, whether that's working for a government, that's working for an NGO or a think tank, where for me these skills are just obviously apply. So, but there's both the research that you're both doing. Then there's clearly a role, isn't there, Lorrie, for your research in a think tank, advising a government. So getting a position within government, you could see that would be very transferable from your PhD.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. And going just briefly back to thinking critically and analysing in the world of AI and Gen AI, these are really important skills, because Gen AI gives the appearance of doing those things, but it doesn't actually do them. Whereas that's human. That's what humans can do. And so, those are really important skills. And as you say, applicable to so many different spaces. And I would love to get a job in government and policy. That would be, a dream.
And I'm sure you will. I have every confidence that you will definitely do that.
Thank
And,
you.
and Lee, you talked a little bit about some of the training that you did when you very started your PhD. So in terms of like the sort of the skills that you've been developing that kind of go beyond your subject knowledge, what kind of support did you get around some of those kind of broader skills that you need then for your PhD?
Yeah, there's two sets of training courses that you can do. So you've got the graduate school, which is quite generic is the wrong word, but it kind of covers all the faculties, all the different faculties. So it doesn't matter whether you're in STEM, whether you're in business and law, whether you're in education, any of that, they apply equally. So that's things like your theoretical grounding, your philosophical points, how to write an academic poster, all those sorts of things that you never thought that you'd be doing. That's where the graduate school comes in. And then there's the faculty specific training as well, which is much more ingrained in, business and law as well. So that takes what the graduate school have done in terms of the more underpinning of your knowledge and making it specific about what you're doing. And you get all the different types of it. So it's academic writing, it's doing your literature review, it's how to do interviewing, it's all those sorts of skills that you may have some knowledge of. You may be quite experienced in one area, you may have no knowledge of another, and they all kind of come together. You can attend them in person, you can come online with them, you can watch recordings on them as well. So there's always things available to you to be able to get back and remind yourself of what was said in one of these calls. But all that kind of training of all those kind of things you didn't even know you needed to know, it is all all comes with the kind of the OU PhD umbrella. And it's vital not only to learn those skills, but also to interact with the fellow PhD students, because that's really important as well. And actually, you can learn a lot from just them and just talking to them. So you've got all the kind of softer skills, you've got the academic skills, and then you've got kind of the skills of working together with people that are doing really interesting projects that's nothing like yours, but they're going through the same process as you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes when we think about a law PhD, we think very much about doctrinal research, but actually empirical research, doing interviewing, focus groups, it can be a different methodological approach to a PhD that law students also are encouraged to think about. So that if you haven't done interviewing or focus groups, that requires training, doesn't it, Lee, in terms of understanding how to do that?
Yeah, and then putting it into transcribing those interviews, and then going through and identifying and cataloging what that sentence was about. And the people in the law school that are doing PhDs are doing doctrinal work, and then there are people like me that are doing empirical studies. And so there's a mixture of those things, but there's all this grounding of information and education out there for everyone that you'll need to pick up to move on with your PhD.
Yeah. So what advice or top tips would you give somebody thinking about doing a PhD? So I'll start with you, Lee.
Yeah, that's a good question. Find something that you are interested in. Is the first and probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because if you're not interested in it, I'm not quite sure how you're going to sustain it over 3 or 6 years to do that. And start reading. Start reading now. What interests you. Start reading the authors that you've read in your undergraduate degree and all those in the areas that you're interested in, because you can never read too much when you get going, because when I started I'd read very little in kind of the areas that I'd decided that I was going to be interested in, and kind of wish I'd maybe spent 6 months doing that before I started, so I had some sort of grounding to get me going. And if you've got any kind of wish to do something like this, then I would wholly encourage you to have a look at it. and talk to some PhD students, and OU's got loads.
Yeah, definitely. And Lorrie, what about you? What advice would you give to somebody, or top tips that you would share think about if someone's thinking about doing a PhD?
I think the the first and foremost would be to make sure you understand your motivation, and that can be like the topic, for example, like it was for me. But honestly, when I was doing my MA in Japan, it was also practical of the visa. Yeah, and that's something that you don't necessarily think about. But I was thinking about it while I was there. Like, what was I going to do? I knew I wanted to grow in this particular area, but I also had to have a visa to live in this country. And so that was a really relevant part of my motivation for research initially. And so that's just, it's really practical, but the motivation, the why you're doing it, it can be the topic, but it can be other things, and just make sure you really understand that motivation, because it is a long journey, and it does take a lot of mental and emotional and physical energy. But yeah, if you have that motivation that you can come back to, and it's your kind of guiding light, I think that's really important to have. And then just really practically think about where you may want to go, that if you have a topic, for example, would benefit from your topic. So for me, like, Ireland was a wonderful place to move to, and it was also somewhere where nobody was doing this research. So it means that I've been able to do research that is necessary in Ireland. It's therefore funded in Ireland, and it therefore means I can hopefully craft a career out of it because nobody else is doing it. And so I've grown a name here as somebody doing this topic. So yeah, I think that those would be the two things: the motivation, and then don't rush, look around and work out where you may be best placed to do your research.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, and I would say to other students as well that, lots of universities have funded PhDs. So the OU offers funded PhDs. Other universities do that as well. So if you're thinking about a PhD, sometimes so I think with Lorrie, yours was very much the top. Am I right in thinking that the topic was decided by your university? They wanted to fund research in this particular area that aligned with you, or is that, have I got that wrong?
No, it wasn't. It was my topic,
right.
And I'm funded by the government of Ireland, so I applied for funding through a research proposal based on my topic.
Right, okie doke. So some universities will have like topic areas, and they'll say, we want research in this particular area. So you would craft the research questions, etc., but that you would apply to a particular kind of university for a particular funding in that particular area. Sometimes you can fund them yourself through your work. So there's lots of different mechanisms for funding a PhD. So it's definitely worth exploring those different ways before you decide if you decide to do it. Anik has very kindly put 3 questions in the chat already. They're sort of slightly connected, and I'm not entirely sure, Lee and Lorrie, whether you can necessarily answer some of those. I possibly can add something to it. But we'll just start. Maybe Lee, you could maybe comment on this. How transferable are the skills and experience from a PhD to legal practice, particularly for someone aiming to be a solicitor advocate rather than pursue academia or policy? So thinking if you had gone into legal practice, Lee, because obviously you've done your LPC, so you have understand, and you work with lawyers already, don't you, in your day-to-day role? How would you say, can you see any transferability between a PhD and legal practice for somebody starting there and then going into practice, or vice versa?
Yeah, one of the key things that you have to learn to do is to communicate your research. So that can be via presentations, it can be via posters, it can be via artwork in some cases. And one of the things that's key is being able to do that clearly. And obviously, in something like advocacy, one of the key points is to make your argument coherent and to make your argument clear. And that's exactly the same as trying to articulate your research topic by not going, because you'll have such an immense amount of knowledge in the area that you're talking about. Trying to sometimes distill that down into a paragraph that people will understand is quite a skill, and it can take you some time to do that. And for doing, and it's exactly the same for advocacy, that you've got a whole area of law that someone is being that is using to either support or to support their case, and you have to distill that down into something understandable, whether that's by jury, whether that's from the judge that may not know the ins and outs of the case, whether that is to the other side on there. So yes, there's quite a lot of transferable skills just in that communication point. The other one is your written skills as well. Your written skills will also improve massively. And over the last 3 months, my writing skills have changed massively on how I write my research proposals and how I write my literature review and that. And all of that helps, because if you can get your message across clearly and succinctly, that will help you whether you're doing advocacy work or whether you're doing written work in law.
Yeah, but brilliant. And Annika, I'll just pick up your last question. How should a law graduate decide between going straight into legal training and practice versus pursuing a PhD first, particularly if their goal is to qualify as a solicitor advocate? So I think you need to know what it is that you want and what your career looks like. So I'm somebody who I was a qualified lawyer and then went into academia and then did a PhD. So I've kind of done it, I suppose, I don't know, I'm not sure which way around is the more traditional one, but I practiced as a lawyer before I came into academia. And I think you need to know what it is that you want from your career, because they offer different things. They definitely cross over, but a PhD is a massive commitment. So you want to think about, do you want to make that massive commitment? If your goal is to become a solicitor advocate, then you might want to focus on that first of all, and to try to achieve that goal. And maybe a PhD comes later, like it did with me. And I certainly think professional practice and academia hugely complement each other. And I think people who bring those backgrounds together, often in their PhD, do quite practical kind of research around things they want to either change the law, change policy, etc. So they're not, I think they can work really well together, but I think you need to decide what career you want first of all, because both of those, either being a solicitor advocate or doing a PhD, both require a huge amount of effort, determination, and resilience. So I would choose the thing that you are most passionate about and start with that and see where that takes you. And sometimes, like, I never intended to do a PhD. I never thought that, just like Lorrie and Lee, I never thought that was something for me. It kind of happened by chance. It's probably one of the best things it's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've had 2 children, so that's saying a lot. But it definitely is the hardest thing I've ever done, but one of the most enjoyable, rewarding things I've ever done, even though there were days where, frankly, I could have just cried. But I think it is an incredible thing to do, and the sense of satisfaction at the end of it is huge, but it is a huge commitment, so you have to kind of recognize that. So I can see, so I think we've hopefully answered most of Annick's questions. Have other people got questions that they would like to ask? You're very welcome to put your hand up, or put it in the Q&A. We've got just about 5 minutes left, so it'd be great if people had questions that they wanted to ask. Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Lauren, you go. Thank you for putting your camera on as well.
So miraculously, I've managed to get distinctions in all of my modules. So I'm thinking of pursuing a scholarship for an LLM, like a competitive scholarship, and I'm just wondering what I should do to strengthen that application.
And where are you thinking of applying to for the scholarship? Is it directly to the university?
So I'm looking into UCL, Cambridge, and Durham.
Okay, cool. Lee or Lorrie, have you got any? Because you've obviously applied for funding, so have you got any top tips you could share around that?
Yeah, so I think, and this is the same for all writing actually, know your audience, know what they want you to say and say it providing it's true to the research that you want to do. Yeah, I think I can't stress that more really, and that can also shift the project that you want to do if you know, like for example Durham are focusing on a particular area. Yeah, tailor your application to that, because that's the way to get scholarships.
Yeah, and I think make sure that you're really clear about what they're asking for in terms of, like, are they asking for like particular things around, do you have to showcase particular background, or make sure, like a lot of them have very strict criteria as well to them, so just make sure that you are really clear about, do you meet that criteria, and can you evidence that criteria if you need to, because sometimes they are quite complex.
I'm a little worried about how I get the academic references as well, because obviously in a BRIC university you have a lot more tutor contact, and for one of these you need to provide 2 tutors as references.
Well, you don't need to worry about that, Lauren, because the law school will support you in that. So if you, when you get to that point, if you send me an email, I will point you in the right direction of someone who can help you with that regard, because we recognise that some of these things are more than a kind of reference you would get like through the SST. So we do have some support around that. So just, do you have my email address? Or have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, just pop me an email, and near the time when you're at that point, and we'll make sure that's sorted for you. Sorry, Lorrie, were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to briefly follow on from what Francine said about making sure you meet the criteria and being specific about it. But when you are applying for scholarships across disciplines, you usually have quite a tight word count to focus on. So like, edit, get rid of any waffle. Like, if you have a sentence and it doesn't have a purpose, it's not required. That's also, like, that kind of precision in a scholarship application, I think, is really important, because ultimately these people are reading so many applications. You need to stand out in a way, and so every sentence needs to have its purpose.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really great advice. And Lauren, I would say that the OU students have a really great track record in scholarship applications. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, so in terms of not just in kind of academic LLMs, but in terms of the bar as well. So, don't be encouraged by that, because Open University, lots of other universities see Open University students as a kind of real win-win, because you've got life experience. You've also, if you can get distinctions while studying, whilst doing lots of other things around that, that shows your level of resilience, your adaptability, your academic cleverness, all of that. So other universities are really attracted by that. So do be determined and do apply for these things, because you can get them. They are achievable.
I'm just thinking, as well, as law students, there's a million arrows pointing at different extracurriculars that we should be doing. I don't even want to think about the Watson Glazers yet, but for example, there's like mooting, there's essay competitions, there's forage experiences. What should I prioritize most when I have that free time?
Well, I think, remember also what you already have. That's really important. I don't know your background, but like, if you just heard Lee and Lorrie talk tonight about their backgrounds, all the skills that you develop if you're working in any context, or you're looking after people in any context, are transferable to being a legal professional. So developing your communication skills, if you're supporting other people in any context, is developing those skills. I think it's often Open University students do not value life experience and life jobs. That a lot of these applications often directed at kind of students who are maybe 18 to 21, who don't necessarily, who've come through that very traditional route, who may not have had a job, and so they want to encourage them to do other things. But Open University students generally have lots of those experiences to draw on. And then I would say, if you want to get experience of things that are relevant to the things that you're interested in, so don't do things for the sake of doing things. There's no point in that. They don't add any value, and you won't be able to talk about them with any passion. So what are the things that you care about? So Annick talked about being a solicitor advocate, then Annick should be doing mooting. If whatever it is you're passionate about, find something that connects to that and do that. But you don't need to tick every single box. And law firms particularly recognise that students don't always have the opportunities in the same way that perhaps when I was at university did have the time to do all these things. So prioritize the things that you can do that you're passionate about, find something like that, and then also think about all the things that you've already got and talk about those. I remember there was one of the big law firms did a presentation thing a couple of years ago, and they talked about one of the best answers they got around the question was something like, give me an example of when you've done a project and it hasn't all gone really well. And the student wasn't an Open University student. They talked about organising a surprise birthday party. Now, an incredibly random example, but it had so much in it about what had gone right, what had gone wrong, etc. And it stood out because most people don't talk about things like that. They talk about something that they think a law firm wants to hear, but often it's, as Lorrie says, it's about making yourself stand out. So don't underestimate what you already have and just focus on the things that you're really passionate about. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
Good, excellent. Thank you very much. Right, well, it is already 8:02. I want to say a huge thank you to Lorrie and to Lee for coming to sharing their experiences tonight. I hope everyone's found it really interesting. I found it really, really interesting. And I hope people have learned something through that process. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the questions as well. As JP said, we will make the recording available. But if you're interested, JP, have we got another session tomorrow lunchtime? If we do a terrible shameless plug for our sessions tomorrow.
We do, yeah. We have another session tomorrow, and our session tomorrow is global litigation and effective teamwork, and it's about hold on, I'm just opening it up.
So it's a partner for one of the big law firms talking about his experience of being a lawyer. I think he was originally from Australia.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in legal practice and want a career in a big law firm, great session to come to tomorrow lunchtime. And then tomorrow evening we have a former OU student called Julian King, who's a barrister. So Anik, if you're interested, probably worth coming along tomorrow evening talking about being a barrister. And he's going to talk a little bit about he was a former police officer, and he transferred becoming into a barrister. So he's going to talk a little bit about, just like Lorrie and Lee, pivoting from one career to another, which is a bit of a theme of the whole of the week. So if you've got any interest in those topics, please do come along. And thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you, Lorrie. Thank you, Lee. Very grateful.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, just stop the recording.